Hi everyone, good afternoon, good morning if you're in Hawaii, good evening if you're in Europe. My name is Brian Francis. I am a contributing editor at Gamasutra.com. I am here today, invisible as always, but happy to chat with you, playing a game on my phone called Six Ages. Six Ages is kind of a strategy role-playing experience. It should be familiar to those of you who know King of Dragon Pass. And while I play today, we are going to be chatting with some fine folks in the lower left-hand corner, one of whom is the fine person I bring here all the time, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm a little late today. Sorry, everybody. I am somehow still, despite that, an editor at Gamasutra.com, and I am very excited because today we have a very special guest joining us to tell us all about this video game. Very special guest, will you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is David Dunham, and I've been making a game for about the last 4 years called Six Ages Ride Like the Wind.
So I am super excited because I, like many people, I think, rediscovered sort of the spiritual predecessor to this game, King of Dragon Pass, when it was released on iOS, I think in 2011. And so real quick, but before we jump into what Brian's playing in front of us, can you maybe sort of walk people who are not familiar with this series, such as it is, sort of through where that game came from, what it was, and sort of how it inspired this game?
So King of Dragon Pass actually began in 1997. We didn't finish that one until 1999 as a simultaneous Mac Windows CD release that we had to put in boxes ourselves because it was so different from everything else on the market that no one knew how to slot it. They didn't know how to sell it. And we ended up selling it ourselves. And on CD, in those days, you had to buy shelf space, which we didn't realize and didn't have the money for. So it got a few really serious fans who kept playing it for years, but it wasn't until I could bring it to iPhone in, I guess, 2011 that it really hit a much wider market. And it was kind of interesting that the original game adapted really well to the smaller screen. The hand-painted artwork was all super good on an iPhone, and the text was actually slightly better, I think, because it had better fonts by then.
Sure.
And I always wanted to do something as a similar game. People were asking for it, but it took me a long time to realize what would be the proper. It wouldn't be a sequel because that's sort of like more of the same. I wanted to do the same thing, only a different take on the same thing. And King of Dragon Pass is set in the fantasy world of Glorantha, which is Greg Stafford's creation. He and I collaborated on King of Dragon Pass. And so Six Ages takes you back to Glorantha. In fact, it takes you to what in King of Dragon Pass is the time of myth. And you are living there among the gods. You're in the god time.
Sure. Yeah, so if you have any sort of questions or things you want to know about this game, its design and everything, please drop them in chat. This stream is mostly aimed at game developers and game students, so we're going to try and pick apart how this game works and how you went out about building it. But I personally am just super curious about why you felt it was worthwhile and interesting to make a computer role-playing game based on this like setting and this franchise and this series, because I regret I only recently kind of sort of became aware of Stafford and of the Glorantha setting and sort of like all the role playing stuff attached to that, like Chaosium and going all the way back to Pendragon and stuff. But as somebody who played a lot of tabletop, like D&D and White Wolf and stuff when I was younger, it's really refreshing to see a video game that harkens back to the history of tabletop role playing games as systems and ways of telling stories about groups of people and societies rather than just like one lone person who's knocking down doors and stabbing orcs or whatever. So why did you think it was interesting to try and make this kind of game in the first place? If people have never played it before, it's a game about like working. It's a game about politics, basically. It's about working with people, like listening to their opinions and advice, and then making decisions as a leader of a clan that are very rarely clear or simple. So why try and adapt that into a PC game or here a mobile game?
Well, the world isn't clear. I was first introduced to RuneQuest, I think, shortly after I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it seemed like it was a better game system, but also it had the world of Glorantha attached to it. So it was probably one. Tecumel, Empire of the Petal Throne, was the first game that had a world attached to it. But I think I liked the RuneQuest rules better. So I was drawn to the game that was the world that was associated with those rules. And Glorantha always struck me as a place where it's far more anthropologically based than the typical game setting. And one of the factors of that is that there's no sides, if you will. Whatever side you're on is the right side. But your foes probably have an equally valid viewpoint, even if they're trolls like we're seeing right now on the screen. You may not like trolls very much because they eat your horses, but the trolls in Glorantha are people too. They have their own mythology. They have their own goddess and spirits. And, you're probably encroaching on their land.
Yeah, totally. And let's dig into the design of the systems a little bit if you're up for it, because so in 6 Ages, as Brian is playing, like there are all these different clans and sort of different creatures living in this area, and you end up trying to keep your own clan prosperous while sort of venturing out and meeting other things. And so many of the way you interact with it is, as you can see, is not about swinging a sword or anything. It's about turning sliders up and down to make bargains and choosing responses in dialogue trees. So it's all about basically political maneuvering and negotiating and trust. How, if you can, succinctly did you try and capture that dynamic of real society in a computer game, like what systems are at play here, and how did you decide? How did you even start trying to figure out how to make that work?
So a lot of that. The systems came about with collaboration with Robin Laws, who happens to also be a tabletop role-playing game designer.
Sure, yeah.
He did Hero Quest, for example. And I just want to step, but you said something about dialogue trees, and they're not really dialogue trees, which is part of the systems approach, is that there is an underlying economic model. So, like right now, you're deciding whether you want to give clan magic or goods. Those are both resources you have. The interactive stories that come up are sort of glued together by the economic model. You may need something like magic or goods, and they're also glued together, as you were saying, by the relationships you have with all the clans. And the two sort of feed each other. As Robin was coming up with a story situation, in some cases he might realize that, we need to track the fact that we had politically offended a clan in the past. So I'd add something to the, let's call it the economic model, the politico-economic model. And then we would work that into more of these interactive scenes.
Sure. So I'm curious, and Brian, jump in if you are. Do you feel like you can easily tell what these decisions, what impact they're going to have in terms of game, in terms of systems or resources or anything, or does it feel?
Well, no. Frankly, no. In that that seems like the intention that you don't know the full cost of your decisions as a tribe leader. Like right now, we're trying to settle a family dispute, and I know that one of these options, there's a numeric option that I can roughly predict based on what my text is, but the long-term consequences can't, be really predicted because I don't know if one of these families is going to stab me in the back or help me out later on. I don't fully understand that.
How would you know?
I mean, that makes a lot of sense in real life, right? But as a designer, as someone who's trying to piece these bits of code and design into a game. How did you choose how did you decide how much to tell people and how to have it play out? I was reading through some of your devlogs, and I think you mentioned not too long ago that you had considered taking down the number of choices compared to King of Dragon Pass, where you would often have 5 choices of what to do at a given moment, and it was very unclear, other than talking to your advisors or going with your gut, what exactly each one would do. And I remember you writing about how you thought about you could take it down to 4 options or even 3, and there would be no discernible loss to the player. Did that end up playing out? Like, how do you choose how many options in a given thing is a good number?
I think it did depend on the situation. We were trying for 5 was our nominal number of choices in King of Dragon Pass, and that was partly so you would be able to replay the game and choose something different the next time through. In this game, 4 turned out to be usually as many as made sense. I guess the other thing, this game tends to avoid any kind of binary choices. Our other rule of thumb was that in both of the games, there's never going to be a right or wrong choice. It's really more about the trade-offs that you want to make. You know, you're going to annoy one family or the other. You might be able to try to make everyone happy, and that could work if you're a really great leader, but maybe that's the hardest choice because you're never going to make everyone happy.
Yeah, fair. I wonder, on that point, how did you sort of walk that line between satisfying fans of the original, either on iOS or on PC, and trying to make something new? Like, how did you balance telling a new story in a new place with potentially new mechanics versus trying to create something that the fan base that empowered you to do that would appreciate?
I guess the fact that people on the team were fans of the game was... I could listen a lot to internal people.
Yeah.
We certainly added playtesters who were, I'm pretty sure that all of them had played King of Dragon Pass extensively. So that was a sort of a core audience we could validate what we were doing with.
So I wonder, actually I should ask first of all, because I didn't realize, how big is the team that worked on this, if you don't mind me asking?
I think we ended up at about 24 people that are in the credits.
Wow.
As team members. Now, they weren't all working at the same time. Different artists were off working on art, and some of it was because there's 2 art styles that are distinctive depending on their function in the game. And QA was something that was brought on at the end. My user interface designer, Pat Ward, was someone who worked with him on and off.
Yeah.
Sort of had a couple iterations there. Let's put in some stuff and then run it in the game for a while and see what more is needed. So we had a pass 2 on that, for example. So he was working a lot for a while and then not for a while, and then came back on.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty common story these days, for sure, the idea of swapping contractors in and on and bringing people in and such. Real quick, I want to talk about the name, if you don't mind, because there's a comment in chat that I thought was interesting. Someone, Acordamore, forgive me, they want to know, actually they assume that the name of the game was inspired by the Orlanthe Windlords, but they want to think Christopher Cross has something to do with it. I wonder, since I think the name has something to do with your proposed plans for how to continue this game going forward, can you talk a little bit about why you named it 6 Ages and why you think that's important?
So at one point I thought I was going to do actually a tabletop role-playing game called 6 Ages that would show different time periods in Gloranthan history, and then I realized that would actually be what the King of Dragon Pass sequel could be.
Yeah.
And 6 different games is sort of my answer to, I want to sell this thing and have a sustainable business, but I don't want to do microtransactions because I don't know how to make a game that works with microtransactions.
Yeah.
So 6 games using more or less the same style and engine seemed like a compromise that an indie could make. And the first game is set in the Storm Age, so wind is in the title.
Sure. I wonder, and we should dig into the nitty-gritty of what it's been like to try and launch this game in 2018 and your experience as an indie developer. But the last game came out in 2011 on mobile, and before that in 1999. So I wonder, you've obviously been doing a lot of work, both in tabletop role-playing games and in digital games. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done as a developer recently? I was looking through some of your credits and stuff, and I'm just sort of curious, because I assume this isn't purely how you manage to keep the lights on. So, what do you do as a developer besides work on something like this?
Actually, this is what I do as a developer, and historically, I had taken a job to work at Shenandoah Studio, and we launched a little studio in Philadelphia and did 3 serious war games for iPad, starting with Battle of the Bulge. And unfortunately, that studio folded, and I was looking for something else to do, and I decided the money from King of Dragon Pass had sort of accumulated to the point where I could probably afford to do this. And having a spouse working certainly helped during that time.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, we try to like talk about this stuff because I think a lot of indie devs do contract work or do side gigs and stuff, and it can be often hard to talk about that. But I think it's really valuable for other devs to know, like, you know, there are a lot of ways to make ends meet when you're trying to make your project perfect. But that's fantastic. I didn't realize that King of Dragon Pass had generated that much revenue, that you've been able to sort of use that as a starting point for this.
Since 2011, it's sort of, you know, it's been out a while.
Just kind of been going there in the background, yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So I want to figure out a way to really dig into why you find this kind of gameplay interesting, because quite frankly, from the outside, there's nothing else quite like this game in digital games. Like, it certainly reminds me of tabletop games. Like, it really reminds me of something like a Burning Wheel. I don't know why. It's the idea that you play out these, you make decisions and then you see how they sort of play out over seasons and over ages. But that seems like a challenging like genre to make a digital game in 2018. So I want to know, how did you go about like trying to get this game in front of the people who would appreciate it most?
Well, in some ways, I think it's easier because you're trying to tell a story, and it's like when you tell it with your own words spoken or written down in a book, you're telling it with words, basically. And if you're trying to tell it with shooting things and opening crates or something, that's kind of harder to tell a story, and at least in my capability of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that, but that's why I go to tabletop, right? So I have another human being there with me, and we can tell the story, and we don't have to worry too much. Like, if the rules don't make sense, we can just sort of fudge the rules, and it's fine. I mean, you can't fudge the rules here as a player. You gotta play within the framework that you and your team have built. So as you were doing that,
that's true, but you actually can approach this in a lot of different styles, and I think, yeah, there's what you're seeing on the screen right now is something that one of my testers managed to use that scene and end up playing in an extremely different style than the typical player might. And I'm not going to give away any other story spoilers at the moment, but
yeah, I admit it's really challenging. Both Brian and I have been playing the release version of this, so we are relatively fresh on it ourselves. And it is a game that is very much about story and very much about, I think twists and such. So I don't, it's hard for me both to A, ask questions about how you pace that, and B, talk about what Brian's playing, because I don't want to ruin it for anyone who's going to go through it themselves. But your comment there is interesting, right? The idea that you would have a friend or a playtester who was playing through a written scene with this artwork here, and like the idea that they would play it differently, that can mean so many different things, it feels like, because any given choice, you have 4 or 5 choices. That just feels like one small point in a constellation that is your game. And like, so this may be like digging too much into the game's plot and the way it plays out to be comfortable, but like, is there a meaningful, how did you design a meaningful variety of play avenues into a game like this? Like, is there one way to play through and that's how you expect players to eventually get to it? Or did you want to try and build a system that could give a lot of room for storytelling?
So it's certainly not a sandbox type of game, but on the other hand, most of the story elements are something that can be presented in pretty much any order. So the context of one of these situations could make the whole story different depending on when it happens. And you have 4 different choices typically, but not only the context of the event, but they usually involve one of your neighboring clans, and which clan it is can make a big difference based on how you've been treating them in the past or how you've been treating their neighbors in the past. So even though it may look like sort of the same thing, as you play, you sort of bring your own interpretation to it.
How did you do that? I mean, it seems straightforward enough, but like, you talk about all these different clans have different relationships. I mean, they have sliding scales of how they feel about you and other clans. How did you build that on the back end? Like, I'm sure other developers would be curious to know how a system like this comes together.
It's not a whole complicated data structure or anything. There's just lots of values for each clan. We switched from a King of Dragon Pass had a more straightforward clan attitude that the other clans liked you or they didn't. And actually, it was sort of what you were just talking about. There's multiple roads to success. So Robin decided that you can influence other clans both because they like you or because they fear you. And we turned the previous just liking relationship into two different ones. And that's what the like and hate numbers on the bottom of the screen are, the number of clans in your valley that either significantly like or significantly hate you, or significantly fear you or significantly disrespect you.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. In my own experience playing through, I was a little bit confused. I was like or hate then goes into, or like or fear goes into hate or mock, and I wasn't sure if they like you too much, will they start mocking you or something? But I'm sure that will. Yeah,
there are two axes, and you can have a clan that likes you but talks bad about you behind your back. And they like you. They just won't want to fight alongside you because they think you're weaklings.
Sure, yeah, and I in watching how the game has evolved from King of Dragon Pass, I'm curious, were there any specific things you tried to implement, what you thought were important or would be interesting to add in, and then didn't work out either because they didn't actually play out the way you hoped, or maybe they were too challenging technically?
I wanted to make combat a little bit more than a single decision, or it's two decisions, I think, in King of Dragon Pass. And it now is sort of more integrated into the you make decisions and you see the results of your decisions and you make more decisions. It's still certainly not moving pieces around on a board like a typical, say, Banner Saga, which is also has a lot of choice-based stuff in it. It took several iterations to get even the current system in 6 Ages to come out reasonably well. Pretty much, though, I don't think maybe I think too small, and I don't think of things I can't more or less think of a possible implementation.
Yeah.
David, if I can jump in with a question while I'm hanging out in Sacred Time, what's always interested me about King of Dragon Pass is that it takes a lot of spiritual concepts and embeds them in the systems. Like the magic screen generally covers this, but between narrative events and other systems-driven events, like you sort of not only build but evolve your clan's religion. This is sort of heavy stuff for certain developers, because the idea that you could reduce faith down to numbers is it's either holy or sacrilegious depending on who you ask. So I was kind of curious about what your mindset was in building that process and what other developers might want to consider when doing the same.
I guess I had a big leg up on that because I had originally chosen to set the game in Glorantha, which has, sort of as I was alluding to before, it has not only one well-developed pantheon, but any number of well-developed pantheons as Glorantha's been written up over the years. So in King of Dragon Pass, pretty much all the gods had been pretty well-defined in stuff Greg Stafford had written, and we're looking at a different culture at a different time period than most of the published material on Glorantha, so a lot of it's sort of analogous to how it worked in King of Dragon Pass. You're obviously going to have a main deity of your pantheon, and you're obviously going to have some goddesses who help you with your herds and your plants. And Glorantha also has its concept of, when the god learners were looking at things, they thought all the gods from the different pantheons were the same, so maybe the trade god here is the same as the trade god in King of Dragon Pass, and wearing a different hat or something, maybe. But anyway, there's still going to be a trade deity, and the runes of Glorantha also are definitely common. I mean, you see your trader there on the screen with the trade rune. And sort of the magic turned into like a technology tree kind of thing. It's not the same kind of detailed progression that a lot of games have, but it was something you could build up and choose which powers you wanted to have available. There should always be more available than you can actually have at one time.
Why is that, do you think?
That you have to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some games may let you do everything, but here you're going to be limited just because of the people actually have to worship the gods. If you think about it on an individual basis,
Mm-hmm.
right, on a clan level, well, of course you want to do anything, but someone actually has to get there and pray on a cold night or something to do the Elmal vigil, and not everyone wants to do that. So you're limited in the number of shrines and temples your clan can support.
Yeah, actually, I mean, we should focus on that for a minute. And 5 Cent Mike, I see your question. It's a really good question. We're going to get to that question, but let's talk about choices in games. So many games are about power scales. They're about just getting to the end. Like I'm playing. I won't say what games they are right now, but I'm playing some other games right now, and they are very much play through the story and unlock the tech tree, and then at the end you're the best. And this is a game that is much more about choices. I realize in a way. That is just fundamental. I mean, I think you can get stronger or weaker depending on a bunch of different variables, but the game itself seems to be purely about making interesting decisions. I want to know if you agree with that, and if so, like why you think that is such an interesting aspect of game design that you have devoted 2 whole games to it, basically.
Yeah, I do think that both games are story games. The story came first. It's not something that helps justify anything else. It's the mechanics that justify the story. And since the story is a multi-generational saga in both games, that's one of the reasons it's at a clan level, because old Jarano and Dustelkarn there will die probably by the time the game is. They could die of old age by the time the game is over, as well as they could die for many other reasons, right? But
yeah,
but you will see like children will grow up and they may have their own children.
Yeah, I think
that's a story that it's not all about power necessarily.
Yeah, I think clearly that has been some of the appealing. That's what made games like Crusader Kings 2 so appealing. Is not just like that's a game about economic and resource management, but also so much of it that seems to catch players' attention is so and so married my cousin, or the king has died and now a child takes the throne, or whatever. It's playing out these stories through generations and sort of seeing what happens and getting to know these characters. There is a question here from 5 Cent Mike that I think is fun. David, what aspects of the Hyala rings?
Oh, we call them Hyalorings, I think, but
Hyalorings.
The riders. That was Robin Laws decided we can't use these. I mean, they are the technical names, but you're the riders, and the people there with chariots are wheels, and then the awful barbarians are the rams, because they worship a god who shows up as a ram.
So why? What was so appealing about riders? Certainly, the last game I felt like focused on staying put. You'd come to the pass and you were going to establish a new village. But I really like the change now to like this mobile, very dynamic group of people. So why riders?
Yeah, I suppose that's actually one of the. I thought they might be even more mobile originally, so maybe that was something I couldn't quite pull off. But again, it was the specific story. I'm trying to take a little known part of Gloranthan mythology and expand upon it, and sort of the story of the original riders had always kind of appealed to me. They're pretty influential in history, just like we had the Mongols come in and do a number in Europe, and before then our Indo-European languages are probably from horse people in the first place, spreading stuff around. I think chariot's a pretty common word in a lot of languages.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's interesting. I had never, there is like such a wealth of myth and storytelling throughout human history, and so much of what games are really focused on a very small segment of it. Like a lot of knights and swords and demons and dragons, and that's kind of it. So to see this stuff explored in more detail, even in a setting like this, is really remarkable. Bryant, what mystery are you going to learn before you build this shrine?
I'm trying to remember who I need to sacrifice to for mysteries so that I can get across the river.
Yeah.
But I can't remember if it's Elmal or Kamra or Orisa.
I think that's a Elmal mystery.
Yeah, it's an Elmal mystery. It just was confusing me because the theme, he's the god. This is the god of war, and I was confused by.
But he's the ruling god too. So.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry. Someone at Kitfox is saying you saw fire children a minute ago. Did I miss that?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, they were fire children. I sent them off. I'm friends with the flame spirit clan or whatever. And so I'm like, oh, well, they have fire in their names, so I reckon they can take care of the kids, right? That's how it works. They're basically Professor X's. It's a home for wayward mutants.
Sure.
David.
So I'm just gonna interject here that you can
Please.
check on that once you finish the sacrifice here, maybe. Not yet. So go to the menu and check on the saga button. Oops, an event happened. Well, we'll have to defer this thought.
I'll check the saga button after.
You can you can check the saga from here. That's an innovation. The more info button lets you get at the saga.
Oh, yep.
God,
Here
that's
we
such
go.
a look at this vibrant picture. Can we talk about the art a little bit? Just because I feel like that's been a.
So there it is, actually. Children of Our Clan.
Ooh.
Is the Fire Kids. So
That was this year, so it's been this year, so we need to wait a year to find out what's going on with them.
This
That's
is
cool.
something that I always hated, the fact I had to take notes when I was playing games. So we're on a computer. Can't the computer keep track for me?
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So
I mean,
it does.
They don't ship manuals anymore with a little note section in the back, so you gotta have the game do it yourself.
So the art.
Yeah, no, I think obviously it's beautiful. This scene in particular, the reds and the golds really are very striking. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the art, because I feel like that's been, and I was embarrassed to say it, but a key differentiator, like a key selling point of these games is this like almost timeless art, So who? Yeah, go ahead.
I used to joke that King of Dragon Pass could sell because we cheated on any game of its day would look terrible today.
Mm-hmm.
Even as pixel art, it would probably look terrible. But we had infinite polygons because we were having people draw it with pen and ink and coloring it with watercolors.
So was that a challenge to work around in the production process? I really have no idea how long it would take to produce art like that, or how you would request it based on how you were structuring the game design. How did you work your production process around that?
It turned out to be slower than we had hoped because it takes time to draw really good art, and that was one of the reasons we ended up adding a few more artists. But at that point, the art styles had already been pretty well established, and we had good art reference, and you could probably tell there's different artists involved, but I think they mesh pretty well. There are 3 basic art styles I was mentioning earlier, and they are for different purposes. The beginning of the game, you see woodcuts, and that sort of is your personal distant past. And the now is the, I think someone called it like a Belgian graphic novel look.
Sure.
Like this stuff here.
Yeah.
And the other art style is what you see when you either are reading about in the lore screen or actually visiting the other world. And the other world should have its own look to distinguish it from anything else. So there's 3 known art styles.
Nice. I want to talk about the business a little bit more if we can, but I want to make sure we don't walk past any interesting game design bits. Brian, have I trampled past any of your questions? Anything you want to slip in here after?
David, it's really cool about Six Ages compared to King of Dragon Passes. You already talked about making some improvements and innovations between the 2 games, but what did you sort of learn changing from a game that was made for a personal computer to a game that was made for mobile? Because I think there's a lot of differences between the 2 that developers have to deal with every day.
The biggest challenge is probably trying to fit stuff on. You're playing on a phone right now, and the interface has to be different, and you can't put too much on the screen, but you probably don't want to put too much on the screen and have people comprehend it on anything. On the iPad version, the advisors are there all the time. Here you have to specifically summon them up, and I hope you are and can read the advice, because probably not
right now.
Probably not.
Your advice is okay.
It's usually more interesting inside a story, but some of the best writing actually I think is in the advice, especially when characters talk to each other. we also tried to, in this menu screen in particular, we're now showing some of the significant status elements of your clan. Both the fact you got at the beginning of the year, you got an omen about people will be healthier this year, so that might mean you don't have to allocate magic to health as much as you normally would. Looks like you've made your ancestors happy by something you did, and you're getting some kind of ongoing benefit from that. At the same time, your people were getting, all these things you could find out by looking at advisors, but we tried to surface that. Make it a little bit easier.
I'm curious, and this might be a little boring, but just like as a very specific thing, where does the writing come from for the different advisors? That ended up being such a key, like that was such a huge part of my time playing King of Dragon Pass and now playing this. And I'm just curious, like, are those just like randomly written lines that are tied up under general like behavior and mood keywords? Are they buckets based on certain personality types that are then assigned to a person for as long as they're alive? Or how do you?
There's a ton of different factors. Especially, the advice that in the management screens here tends to be very focused on. What's my magic situation? How should I improve? What shrines I might want to get? Although that also is tied to personality. The ones that are most important, though, are the story advice, and Robin and I write those along with the scene itself. And there's a number of factors that decide how advice is given. Partly, these are your advisors, and they should be giving you advice that's meaningful. So it's not like you have a war advisor and a food advisor specifically, but if there's advice that combat matters or food matters, the best combat member on your clan circle will give that advice. There's also personality-based advice. I wish I could see, you're not looking at advice right now, but
we're just fascinated by this crossover with Jurassic Park evolution.
Yeah, so that one was probably the horse goddess's, the horse priestess's advice might have been because she was a horse priestess. This might be just, well, this is useful advice and someone needs to give it, or which is another category that we need to have someone give a bit of advice to help explain the story or the background of the world. So their skill matters, their religion can matter. In some cases, their family membership matters because families are an important element in a lot of the politics of the game. Different advice will be given depending on, you can get kind of weak food advice if your advisor isn't very good. If they're like heroic level, they might give slightly better advice. So it could be two variants of particular advice. And they also give recommendations on one of the which choice makes sense based on what they're saying. You won't get that here, but you do get that inside an interactive scene.
Nice. There is, I won't call it a question, but there is just a reminder from Kid Fox Games in chat that a number of game developers have cited your work as a influence, including, I think, the folks who made the Banner Saga, and I think also maybe Fallen London, although I could be wrong.
No, that's not.
Am I wrong?
That's not
crazy.
Wait.
Both of those games have acknowledged.
Okay.
They've been inspired.
Brian, you make me nervous.
Into the same studio, and I was like, "What? Those are two very different teams." Sorry, I missed it.
Failbetter's famous the Banner Saga. No, so yeah, I am like, these games have had a small but enduring influence on the game industry, and I'm so curious to know how that influenced your continuing work in the game industry, and why you think these games seem to have such, if you'll forgive me, like an outsized impact. I mean, they certainly sold well, but they were not, I wouldn't say huge hits. I hope Six Ages does incredibly well. But definitely I have met people who in the years since that original game came out have sort of called it a cult classic, like I do, and think it's very good. So I wonder why you think it is, and why did it take so long for these stories and characters and designs to sort of make an impact on the world?
It's probably both are the same thing, really, that there really wasn't any other game like King of Dragon Pass, which obviously it's not going to be like well, Quake and Doom, are they really that different? You know, you're going to get the same impact from that. On the other hand, it was so different from everyone else that you can't make another game like that, and it isn't a strategy game really, and it isn't really a role-playing game as computers describe it, and it isn't. I mean, so many things it isn't, and you know, trying to put it like into an app store category is kind of challenging. It's obviously a game, but is it a strategy game or a role-playing game? You know.
Yeah, I don't know.
And at one point, when we were originally selling the box version, I think that was what like the stores were looking for. We need our strategy title for this month that we're going to put on the shelves, because we already got a role-playing title for this month. And since the game wasn't any of these things, it was hard for us to sell. And, you know, a big company that has to make multi-million-dollar bets isn't going to be wanting to risk something that's so different.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And for what it's worth, I think the question I just asked you is a very hard question to answer, and it's kind of BS. So I appreciate you giving that response.
That's also why sort of more indie, you know, Stoic wasn't a huge team, and Fail Better isn't a huge team. So they could take more influences from an unusual game.
Yeah, and Kid Fox also points out that their own Moon Hunters was.
That's right. Yes, of course.
Which, I mean, certainly you can, like, the art style alone is a very beautiful sort of homage to this game.
And the fact you're creating a mythic future for yourself.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to talk about this game, and like the best way to describe it for me is like just a myth simulator. You know, it's like you just play through it. But sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I haven't even, like, on the stream, I haven't even poked at any of the rituals yet, where you literally like do mythic stuff, like vision quests and the like. I've been focusing on the normal stuff, because when I played King, I got a little too into the rituals and wound up to the detriment of my clan. So I'm just trying to keep things a lot, like, you know, I'm trying to get us to a good place before I dive down that rabbit hole. Going to the chat, there was a comment I wanted to go back to. Jan says, when David first asked them about Six Ages, you phrased it as, do you want to draw a game based on Afanasevo culture? Moon Hunters also used, I don't remember if it was technically Bronze Age, but it was, I think Tanya once told me it was Mesopotamian culture. What do you think, what is pleasurable from a design standpoint in working in these very ancient settings?
I don't know. I have always been interested in sort of bringing, you know, you read some anthropological thing, and I want to help bring them alive. So the Osprey books with Angus McBride doing reconstructions of things is, you know, he probably has a few old bronze corroded things and bits of horse harness or something, and somehow you reconstruct those into a picture with action in it. And to some extent, I guess that's what we're doing here. Certainly used a lot of Osprey books as reference, but yeah, we're bringing a culture to life and sort of realizing how it might actually work once you start drawing lots of pictures or writing about it. Sometimes,
yeah.
We certainly discovered in King of Dragon Pass, I think it was actually something one of my artists figured out. You're playing the Orlanthi, who are wind worshippers, and they can fly. And if you're flying around in clouds and rain, you might get lost. So they paint the roofs of their chiefs' houses with distinctive designs, so you can find out where you are when you break through the clouds.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is going to be kind of a weird question, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot as I play through these games. Is like trying to sort of tie a line between these mythic fantasy tales and, you know, sort of what they're inspired by in real human history. Is there a specific clan or region or something that really deeply inspired this world and these stories? Because I've always wondered, and I don't know much about Glorantha. I never really played the tabletop stuff. But when I came to King of Dragon Pass, I was sort of surprised that, like, everyone is kind of this Eastern European sort of like sun-dappled, sort of light-skinned plains person. And I'm just kind of curious, like, you know, what, if any, inspiration from real human history went into these games?
I'm not sure of all of Greg Stafford's inspiration. I know he read extremely widely. King of Dragon Pass probably has its sort of semi-fictional inspiration are the Viking family, the Icelandic family sagas, like Egil Saga, Njal Saga, they're probably somewhat fictionalized, but they were originally based on real people who lived in Iceland and had offspring who went around killing each other over feuds. And
yeah, I mean, that does make a lot of sense. Certainly, and again, I don't know the fiction, but I was always surprised in King Dragon Pass, like everyone was sort of pale. Like, I mean, there were plenty of women and plenty of age differentiators, but it's all kind of the same. And there's
that's
ducks.
probably because we were all pasty Seattle people making it. But
oh no,
that is unfortunately a drawback if you're trying to make a game about a clan of related people. They probably look alike, and I wish I had a better answer to that one.
I mean, that's just how it goes. I mean, that's storytelling. Certainly,
but there are somewhat different looking people in this game because they're different people. And
yeah, I was looking for more of a Mongolian vibe and style when I first started playing, and I saw that it was like a horse people. But I haven't played very far, so I haven't seen a ton of the. Whoa.
Sorry, that's my phone. Sebastian. In order to give you any music in the background, I needed to leave it on.
Yeah, fair.
We did. I think Jan did take sort of a Western Asian inspiration, where there's actually, I think, some. I forget the name of the peoples, but you can have people with kind of the what we'd think of as an Asian eye look, but blue eyes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's fair, and there's. It's refreshing to see a developer dig into this kind of mine of cultural reference. That is to say, like, and there's someone in chat saying the same thing, quite frankly. Let me see. Jen Postbacil says you can get so weird with the Bronze Age, and it's all real, and it's mostly untouched in terms of like, modern creative work. And I think that's right. It reminds me of that fantastic game a couple years ago from that African studio, and I cannot remember the name of it. Forgive me, but it was like an action RPG based on African myth, and it was incredible. And same thing with Dandara, which is another similar, like a very untouched, untapped well of like interesting folklore and history that is like sort of tapped to make an incredible game. But anyway, we can stop talking about the mythic history of this. I want to know about the reality. How has business gone so far for a game like this in 2018 on iOS? It seems like it would be very challenging.
It's kind of hard to tell because it's been out for a day and a half of sales. I'm not unhappy yet, so
that's good. That's a promising sign.
We made #1 on some of the charts in Finland, so that was sort of my goal. Finland's always been very good for us. I'm not entirely sure why, but
yeah, actually, let's talk about that for a second.
Someone in chat says Karmakata. They're from Finland, and where King of Dragon Pass was a huge hit, and they're here. Finland is saying hi.
I am here for these mecha owl people you're talking to, because these people are incredible. Like
the dwarves there. Why don't you tap the screen to show them?
Yeah,
tap the picture.
Yeah, show us, Brian.
We got warning. We got a warning about these guys, so I am taking them as seriously.
Oh, these are cool. I like these a lot.
Gloranthan dwarfs are not like normal mythic dwarfs from Norse mythology that Tolkien used. They're actually living machines or rocks.
I gotta play more of this game. All right, so in Finland, why do you think the King of Dragon Pass did so well? I was reading one of your devlogs, and you suggested it was because you didn't have to buy shelf space there, and I didn't quite understand.
So that goes back, I was saying that when we had the boxed game in the United States, you don't show up in a physical store unless you buy shelf space. But Finland's a small country, and apparently they don't have that system. So their magazine Paylit wrote a quite favorable review of the game, and then everyone started to want to buy it. And we were going through hobby game distribution because that didn't have the same barriers to entry. And apparently this, I think it's Fantasia Paylit in Helsinki, was importing the game and redistributing it all over the place because it was a demand-driven business in Finland, where it was, I'm not sure how, more push-driven marketing in the United States in terms of getting a game on the shelf. So because there was demand in Finland, the game could move. Since we were tiny and couldn't push, the game didn't move in the United States to the same level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How is it, now in 2018, where it is, shelf space is not a concern at all. It is pure digital, or is mostly digital here for sure. How did you try and push this to the best of your resources? Was it all on like App Store and press outreach? Was it YouTube and that kind of thing? Like, how did you try and get the word out to people who would appreciate it most?
Well, we have tried to have a social presence as soon as we started making the game, although when it's so spread out over 4 years, it was probably harder to make that work compared to a lot of indies where they have a shorter dev cycle and they can be transparent and they're not worried about spoiling the story. Mm-hmm. It was just sort of a guerrilla marketing approach, though, the whole way, and using the social media as we can. I'm not particularly a YouTube person because I'm more into the written word than watching it.
I was going to say, you're going to be a YouTube person soon, but yeah.
That could be.
We're going to put this on YouTube later. People can watch it. So there you'll be, if nothing else.
Smash that like button.
But the fact we had, I think it's closing in on 200,000 people 200,000 units have been sold of King of Dragon Pass. We're not quite there yet. And a lot of people say they've bought it on multiple platforms, so I don't really know how many players are out there. But we did have the advantage that we had a little bit of a market out there, we hope.
Yeah, I'm just curious in retrospect. I don't think I ever got the answer to this. I know the iOS version sold much better at launch than the PC version in the 90s did, but when it came out on GOG, did that popularity of the iOS version then spur a huge jump in PC sales there, or has it always been dominantly an iOS favorite game?
GOG is probably second in as a sales thing for us. A lot of that came when they have these really amazingly cheap, like you can buy it for less than $1 sales, maybe as bundles or just some sale, 90% off or whatever they do. I have a suspicion that a lot of people have bought it there and haven't played it, because why wouldn't you buy a game for $1 that's this good? And all the other games they sell too, right? But so I'm not entirely sure all of those are players, but
well, I mean, they could be players. It's interesting. This game has a sizable.
What's your Steam unplayed queue look like, right?
Oh, let's not talk about it. Let's never, ever, ever talk about it. Especially after they added that feature recently where you can see how much money you've spent on Steam. It's just not a good subject, ever. So yeah, we have about 5 or so minutes left in our hour, so we got to wrap this up. But if you have any questions for David, please throw them in there, and we'll try to get them done. I don't really have any questions other than I think it is very bold to sell an iOS game in 2018 for $9.99, and I think that is. I
was kind of cowardly to do it. I think. I think it should sell for more.
I mean, I agree, but like iOS is such a strange marketplace, where like a game that would sell for $30 or $40 on a PC is.
The Canada game? What's it called?
Canada. Oh, Death Road to Canada.
Death Road to Canada is I think 14 right now.
Oh, that's great! Actually,
I think Binding of Isaac is over 10 also. Might be 15.
Yeah, maybe should have gone for 15.
So I felt a little cowardly making it as low as 10.
Well, why did you make that choice? Was it just to try and spread it?
It did seem like a cluster of games would be at that price, and King of Dragon Pass has done okay at that price, which was kind of a. Then I was bold to make it 10, but now I feel cowardly making it 10 in a way. But
oh, that's good. Actually, I feel a bit behind the times, and I certainly, I paid $10 for it, and I was like, oh, cool. But I thought we were still at that stage in the iOS game market where sort of Square was the only outlier in terms of pricing, and most devs had shot for $5 or below. But you're right. I mean, if there are other games going for 10 and 15, I think this game probably could have gone for more.
It's pricing is a black art, I think, and
yeah.
I think there are some psychological things, like there's no point in making it 9, for example, because that's still a lot of money if you think 5 is a lot, and you're not going to lose a whole lot of customers between 9 and 10, so go for the extra.
Yeah, they're just steps, right? It's 5, 10, 15.
Not exactly. It was curious that some people did actually try 8 or 9, but not very many, and I assume that's because some prices work better than others.
Well, Bryant, have I cut you off? Do you have any last burning questions you want to slip in here in the last couple minutes?
Just going to remind the chat that if they want to add any last burning questions, they should definitely toss them in. I'm going to jump into my pile of questions here. David, before we go, I should ask, when you're setting out to make a system, like there's so much going on behind the scenes when I play this game. There's a calculation, there's a probability. In your starting, can you walk us through what your sort of philosophy is when you start designing any individual system, and what you're looking for in terms of making it effective?
I don't know if I have a serious philosophy. It's depends on the specific thing I'm trying to do with it. There's 7 skills, partly because we wanted to match up with the original. In Greg Stafford's writing, you have a clan council of 7 members. Each of them is good at one thing. So that's one of the reasons there's 7 skills in the game. But there's also, there's reason 7's a number 2, right? From like the Miller article, 7 plus or minus 2, and it's the magic number in a lot of stories.
We should look that up. What is the Miller article? I want to go find this article.
It's the number of things you can keep in short-term memory is 7, plus or minus 2. It's why I don't know if people use phone numbers anymore, or if it's just memorized in your phone, but that's kind of why phone numbers are the length that they are.
Oh,
you can actually remember a phone number.
In theory, I've heard some theory before about 7 being the magic significance of 7, which I think comes out of Kabbalist numerology. So in theory, you could actually loop the weird mysticness of 6 Ages back into its design, but you have to subscribe to numerology to do that.
So I've lost some of the audio here.
Oh, sorry. Did I? No, I'm still here. Did you? I was just commenting on 7 being a magic number, which comes out of numerology.
But so the fact we're trying to do a game about myth may inspire some of the things too. That what feels like it's going to, going for a feel as much as working on the numbers behind the scenes. And I'll try to make the systems come out such that things work. We also have to deal with emergent behavior a lot. We're trying to do a little bit of tuning now that, like, clan mood has been an issue that everything makes sense in a little context of 1 or 2 scenes, but when you play the game for 30 game years, small values can really accumulate, and that can become a problem.
Well, there's one more question in chat we can get into. I'm going to rephrase it just because the question's we've sort of already covered this. Vire23, when you decided to make 6 Ages, they're asking if you already knew that this game would be about the writers, or have you considered other folks in the setting? What alternatives were put aside when you settled on the writers?
That was pretty much, from my original concept of setting the game in a part of Glorantha where tons of stuff happens. Like, the first thing that seemed interesting that happened was when the writers were there. So, sorry, I don't think I had a lot of choices there. Everything just kind of, came into light all at once. Oh, look, it's the foreigners.
Yeah, I have to figure out what to do here. But unfortunately, while I am figuring this out, I have to point out we are out of time. Thank you all for watching the Gamasutra Twitch channel. These folks look... never mind. We, as always, are happy to have you here. I'm being told I need to give them a gift, so I'll do that.
They all have trade-offs.
Well, I'm going to listen to your art person and see what happens. Anyway, thank you all for watching the Gamasutra Twitch channel. We would prefer to... we would love it if you were to follow us on this here Twitch channel, because if you do, you'll get more conversations with game developers to make the games you want. Unfortunately, Alex Warrow seems to have abandoned us in our time of need, so normally I would ask him to refer you to the great website Gamasutra.com, where you can read more articles about making this kind of game. And David, thank you so much for joining us. If they've got more questions about making games like this, where can they ask them?
We are hanging out on a Discord channel that, in fact, KitFox provided for us, so I didn't have to go through all the details of doing that. You'll find the link on our website, sixages.com.
Cool. So head over to sixages.com if you need that link. For everyone else, thank you so much for watching, and have a good day. Farewell.